Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another extreme episode from Extreme People on the Rupert and Pinchy Show. That is Pinchy over to my right, left, or up or down, whichever he's situated at. And I'm right here, the one talking. Um, Thank you for joining us. And we know your time is precious. And so, with that, I'd like to go into the inner workings of a combustion engine.
Are you reading from a teleprompter?
No,
That's
no,
what it
I'm
looks
not.
like. What are you looking at?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. Pause. Now let clapping happen.
End of message.
No, I am preparing
Well,
a dynamite stick. This is going to be an extreme show.
yeah, okay. We gotta censor you. I don't know what's going on with you. You
Uh,
can.
I just been so irritated on my phone and everything. It's like extreme politicians in Washington. Extreme politicians in Washington. So the Democrats will say extreme politicians in Washington. And then the Republicans will say extreme politicians in Washington. I'm like, you know what? If there are extreme politicians in Washington, guess what else? I have extreme neighbors in my neighborhood. It's like extreme extreme grandsons in Minnesota.
Yeah, I can't even take that seriously. That's just
uh
it's
it's
just a
irritating.
stupid propaganda tactic, and both sides use it. Um,
Yeah.
I just can't take that stuff seriously anymore. It's like clickbait. Actually, it's probably where clickbait comes from, is the news. Uh, of
I think
making
you're right.
extreme headline.
Well, why don't we today we're going to be talking about extreme atheists and extreme non-atheists in the fight in the extreme warfare of extreme fighting.
Well, and the thing is, you could get the message across of like, um, those words don't mean anything. They just make it sound interesting. Like, they literally could just leave that word out and it would be just as accurate. Like, Democrats say such and such. Instead, they say extreme Democrats say such and such.
Hmm.
But
I think we
anyway,
give yeah. So we don't want to have a political show, or let's just stick
why
with our
not? Let's do it.
extreme idea. Yeah, let's stick with our extreme idea that I don't know what it is because you haven't shared with me, and I'm not reading a teleprompter. Pause. Let the people clap. And
That's really funny. I'm not reading a teleprompter. Applause clap. Somebody has got to do that to Joe Biden on accident. Like, hey, here's this teleprompter, and it says, I'm not reading from a teleprompter on the teleprompter. That'd be
you know what he
funny.
recently said again?
No.
Don't
Again?
jump. No, don't
Again?
jump.
Uh,
Don't jump. Wow, that is just so weird.
yeah.
That is,
Yeah, we live in
he's
a weird
seeing things.
world.
Yeah, we do. So what's on your mind?
Well, hopefully it's something that we can build a conversation on, but I'm not sure. It's just a couple of things I was thinking about yesterday.
I hope
Um,
it's not extreme.
no, it's not actually.
Okay.
Um, it was. I don't want to go into the full details of and context, but I was reading something for um, school for college,
Hmm.
and he said something that sparked an idea or a thought in my mind, which was about the uh, difference between our lives now versus the difference of our lives in the past. From not too recently, actually, like within the last uh, 100 years, there's been a shift where the level of prosperity that we have in the world at this point is unprecedented. And things that I was thinking about, people used to not have running water. Um, they obviously did not have wheelchairs, or like electric wheelchairs, which I use every day. They didn't have, um, I mean, people of the old times used to not even have toilets in their houses. Um, Not necessarily 100 years ago, but um, it was, at least for the majority of human history, that wasn't the case. Um, they didn't have the internet technology that we have. Um, they didn't have phones. They didn't have um, cars. They didn't. It's just insane the amount of things that have been invented in the last couple 100 years. And the thing is, it's so it's an awkward it's an awkward part of history because in Christianity, the way that we look at prosperity and wealth and stuff like that it can be a trapping for us, and it's true that money and prosperity is a trapping for humans, but the amount that we rely on that nowadays is so immense that everyone, it at least most people, are rich, even if they're not uh, technically in the upper class. They're still rich with amazing prosperity, and it's difficult to navigate the how do I not rely on my wealth to such a degree that I can't live without it, um, and how do I avoid that trapping where I rely on it
Hmm.
so heavily, and how do we uh, understand our wealth um, in the context of Christianity, and how do we avoid it? Because I would say that it's really hard to say that we don't rely on um, technology too much. I feel like we do. And so, how do we avoid becoming so comfortable with it that we become reliant on it and run into the same traps that we were warned about by Jesus and by the early church and such people? I don't know. It's just something that I was thinking about. I don't know if you have any thoughts
Well,
on that.
yeah, a lot of different ways you could go on that. And so, if I get off topic or I start talking about the inner workings of submarine engines and instead of what we're talking about, just holler at me, okay? So, submarines are cylindrical and long, and they generally are in water. No,
Hey, you're off subject.
okay,
Can you move your
okay.
microphone a
So,
little bit closer?
yeah, testing 1 2.
All right,
Thank
that's
you.
better.
All
Thank
right.
you.
A couple things that occur to me. You're talking about wealth and the lure, the danger, you know. And and last week we talked about competition, and then we talked about we mentioned where Paul says that he lays aside everything that would weigh him down, and he
Yeah,
mentioned some of those things, which is sin, and prosperity is not sin,
right.
and right, but it can become a trap, and so I think maybe what balances that out, it's not wrong to depend on prosperity and the fruits and the peace that is in the world, uh, without but there has to be some clarifiers. It's as if you're flying in an airplane, and and one person looks to the other, says, I just feel like I've been too dependent on and aerodynamics. I just kind of, I just feel like there's a real trap in that. And the one next to him says, well, I kind of want to depend on aerodynamics, at least until we land. Okay. So, so all the gifts and you mentioned running water. Yeah, it's a what would you call it? It's a luxury, but it's no longer a luxury anymore.
Right.
Now it's a necessity because in a large metropolis, let's say like Los Angeles, who is very dependent upon the water system and the plumbing and the sewer system and all that. If that fails, then mayhem will start because of the sheer number of people in that area. So so wealth can be a trap, but it's also supposed to be a blessing, and I think it's when you the only thing that can possibly keep it in balance is if our eyes are on in the next world, and be a little bit like Abraham. It's like, yeah, God bless me. I'm kind of the most blessed guy in the world, but I'm gonna live in tents because this isn't my home.
Right. Well, yeah, I think that's all good points. And I think that uh, the I was just thinking, no matter how much prosperity we have, we should always be content. And I think that's what is required of us, right? And so let's say that we didn't have um, we didn't have toilet paper, let's say. We should be content without having it. And try and make do with what we do have. And
Hmm.
so, but that's what my concern is the idea that what would happen if I lost my computer, let's say. That, like, looking internally, that would hurt. That would hurt me because I do my reading on my computer and I do all sorts of stuff. I mean, my job is on the computer. And so, looking at that, that's a scary thought. And so I'm wondering, like in my heart, is how should I deal with that? Because I have anxiety even thinking about it. And I mean, be anxious about nothing. And
Hmm.
I, it's just like, yeah, I think that we should be happy with the prosperity we have, and we shouldn't be like, yeah, I think that I'm too, uh, spoiled, to have this plane, and then just, just take the plane. No, that's a terrible idea. But, yeah, I mean, that's what I'm worried about, and, yeah, there is that definitely, um, possessions themselves aren't bad, but again, it's just like, would I be willing to give it up? And that's a difficult question to answer, at least for me.
Hmm. Well, some of the saints in past ages, or some of the theologians in past ages, talked a lot about detachment from things, and the necessity to grow in the spiritual life or to grow closer to God requires detachment from this world. And if we're not willing to detach from this world, um, in those things, whatever clings to us so closely, then we're probably not going to grow very further in our faith per se. But but uh, we're all attached in some way to this world. But uh, and sometimes this world takes away those attachments. You know, war or famine or you know. But what do you do in those times that in peace and prosperity that it's not really threatened. In reality, uh, life is very fragile, and at any moment things can change. The scripture says, at any moment things can change. The rich man can become poor, the poor man can become rich in a split second. And so, um, but in general, what do you do when that is not the case? In I think that's what you're talking about, where how do you start to prepare your character, your mentality in the time of prosperity? Uh, like you mentioned, your computer. I thought to myself, you know what? If for some reason I couldn't do a podcast or whatever, it's all right. That's secondary.
Right.
The primary thing that God wants us to do is love our family, pray to Him, and go to church, and know our neighbors. Well, right now those are a challenge to love your family, go to church, and know your neighbors. So,
Well, that's always a
you know,
challenge.
yeah. So, but those are the things that are the most important. Some of these other things that we're attached to um, are less important, and God is definitely not dependent upon them. You know,
Right.
Paul. Paul, if he was in living or any of the saints, he'd be using every kind of media there is. Paul would be a major Twitter hammer. But you know what? If Twitter just like took his handle away or whatever, he'd be like, oh well, he'd just step on to the next thing because, uh, or maybe he'd be challenged about it. But from God's perspective, he's not concerned. God's like, oh my goodness, the internet's down. How am I going to get my word out there? Oh boy.
Yeah.
It's funny that you bring that up because I don't know, about a week ago I had this dream um, where worldwide uh, all electronic devices went dead for 2 hours, and there was mayhem. And I don't remember, there wasn't much of the dream after that, but it was just like for 2 hours, 2 hours worldwide, uh, all digital devices and communications went
Yeah,
offline,
that would be
and
weird.
that exposes, like you were kind of saying, what would I do if my computer went bad or if it was taken from me? Or what if the extreme politicians in Washington came to your extreme household and extremely took your extreme computer?
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Yeah, well, it's realistic. That's a realistic dream, I would say. Would be
Sure, yeah.
if the internet was taken away, there would be absolute mayhem, and I
Mhm.
absolutely believe that because, uh, at least a lot of people have replaced most of the communication with the internet communication, which is not great, obviously. Um, and so imagine that being taken away from you all of a sudden,
Mhm.
and you're like, well, now I can't even say anything, and that's it's different than it used to be because free speech was more of a thing that you had in the public square when you were uh, walking around, and you had to actually be there to communicate your ideas. Well, now you you could be anonymous and your voice is taken away. Like you could nobody could know your name, and then all of a sudden your voice is taken away just because of the
Mhm.
ideas that you speak. Um, Whereas they would actually have to persecute you specifically in order to silence you. And um, the I don't know. I think there's a difference between now and back then. Um, but what was my point? Oh, yeah, that would be very crazy and insane because of how much people rely on that.
Mhm.
And it's good that we use that as a tool, but when does a tool become so overused that uh, we rely on it more than we should? And I think that's one thing that does bother me about how much things are digitalized and subscription based ideas where you have to continually, you don't actually own anything. You just keep, um, you know, spending money to actually be able to use a service, but you don't actually own it. And the thing is, when you don't actually own something, then that's can easily be taken away from you. And when we rely on technology so much, if that's taken away, then that leaves us in a bad and exposed position. And so, I've always wanted things to be kept in the physical world, physically accessible, and because um, it becomes easier for those things to be taken from you. Um, and so, because of that, that's if that if your voice is taken away and the major part of our lives is taken away, then we're going to be, or more likely than not, we're going to be very upset when it's taken away. And that's something that I want to avoid. I don't know. I feel like I'm droning on and on and on.
No, no. Well, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So the old saying, "Don't carry all your eggs in one basket." Um, we kind of are carrying all our eggs in one basket, and that's the and we got two themes going here. We were talking about prosperity a little bit, but now we're going a little bit into the fragility caused by carrying all our bags in one basket. That being the internet and the digital age. All our buying, selling, learning, reading, employment, everything done through digital means. And if that digital means is shut off, then mayhem, because that's everything's tied into that. Just even the workings of in a large city, the of electricity, of the water system, of the sewer system, everything is worked on switches and shut off valves and stuff, all digitally. Well, what happens when that fails? It looks like we're carrying all of our bags in a very large one basket. That if it fails, then a lot of things are going to happen. And so, what would we do with that? And then, so the mass hysteria at the failure of that basket, or the um, is the second biggest cause of problems, because people freak out and mayhem starts, and fighting, infighting, and so yeah, it's too bad, because digitally, uh, it's very we can see the really great use of it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a great tool. The problem is, this is a fallen world, and someone's always going to use it for bad means.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so what? So the key is, though, you use the tools. It says walk in the light as long as you have the light. Work in the day until the day night comes, when it says no one can work, which is kind of interesting. That's like the switch being switched off on digital, or someone saying you're going to abide by our rules, or we're switching you off. Um, you work until that time comes. You prepare for that. It would seem, and in reality, if we're following after God, if we're truly seeking Him, when those things happen, it's going to be like, oh well, let's move on. Let's see what we got to have to do here. We should be ready for it, and but in the meantime, coming back to your one theme of prosperity, what can we do to prepare ourselves, or to train ourselves, like Paul says, uh, in this time of prosperity? And if this time that we're all so attached, to so many different things, there's something we can do, that some practical things that we could do that would prepare us for that. One of the practical things, just thinking, what would I do if this was shut off on me? You
Right,
know,
exactly.
just the thought of thinking, what would I do? It's funny bringing that up. There was a time, everyone should experience this, and maybe they all have, but there was a time where I was literally in a very precarious spot, and I had a very small amount of funds to take care of myself and my basic needs. And my neighbor needed money, and I felt that I needed to give him that money, and I did, but it was really scary. And and uh, um, and it was so important for me to experience that, and because I was willing to do that, I wasn't saying I was all in faith.
Right.
I wasn't like, but it was just like I realized, like, it's the realization that the Nazis are at the door, or the tigers are running towards you, and there's a basket that only one of two people can get in, and you're going to let the other person get in that basket, and you're going to deal with the lions. That is a real interesting place to be thrust into. And mine was really small. It's like I wasn't on some island and I was given my
Right.
last cheeseburger, and there was no other cheeseburgers. But it still had that kind of feel and sense to it. And so there's got to be things that we can do um, practically that could help us prepare for that. And one of them is just doing our thought experiments. What would I do if this happened?
Right. Well, and no, that's definitely something I was thinking that would be a good way to approach it. And again, I don't want to go back to this over and over again, but for me, again, it thinking about what would I do without this luxury that I have is even more scary. I mean, okay, I don't know everyone in all their circumstances, but I imagine relying so much on a wheelchair, for example, that you use to move around, and then imagine not all of a sudden not being able to use that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know
Mm-hmm.
what would happen.
Right.
Like probably a manual chair, but
Yeah.
that's one thing that is a major part of my life that I can't even imagine what would happen without it.
Well,
Quite.
I tell you what I would do is I would make two gold poles, and then me and your dad and Ethan and Andy would put you on a throne chair kind of thing, and we'd carry you on our our shoulders all around.
All day?
Everyone bow down. Yeah, everyone bow down. Here comes Isaiah.
No,
No,
please
no.
no.
So yeah. Well, the other thing, uh, you I learned something when I went to muscular dystrophy camp with you. Um, the fear that many of those who are bound to wheelchairs, and I didn't really understand it, but after the camp, I understood it then. It's more in your face. But they really don't like going on piers out into the water, or walkways on a lake or at the ocean, because if they were to fall into the water, they have no way of swimming.
Right.
It's a done deal. And so there's a real fear, and we call it fear. Actually, that would be a real prudence. Wait a minute. Oh, so if I fall into the water,
Right.
I'm gonna end my life. So it'd be prudent not to go on
Right,
that
exactly.
pier.
Yeah, that's true.
So, but the dependency is similar. It's not to that extreme that you're on, but just little experiences like that we have through our lives, that something that we may not suffer or risk, but other people do. But we all have risks somewhere that will cause extreme change if that were to be challenged, and or taken away from us, a comfort or a benefit or something, or a service taken away from us. And so when I was with you I learned a lot about certain fears, and remember when they were pulling us around with the speedboat, and you and I
That was
were
crazy. Oh my
were
gosh.
were on
The
the
tube.
inner tube.
Yeah.
I was in total fear because we were bouncing all over the place, and I wasn't in fear for me, but I was trying to hold on to you and not tip over, because I thought, now obviously you did not have your wheelchair on the tube. It was
Right.
you and me, you and me placed in the tube, being pulled around by a speedboat on the lake,
I wonder
and
why they didn't continue that the next year.
it might have been the 4 fatalities. No, there was no
No, there wasn't.
fatalities.
But
Uh,
still,
I would like them to still do that, but then have certain
straps.
uh, well, I would like to have like a float tied to your arm or something. So, oh, where is he? I think he's under here, so we can find you right away and save you. But, um, yeah. So what do we do when think about Paul being in chains, always
Yeah.
in chains, always beaten, always harassed from city to city. You know, wouldn't you just like to have a nice little library with his parchments and books
Probably.
and
Definitely.
and, and a pipe or a cigar and some wine and read and write the deep things about God? But
Yeah,
anyway.
he learned to be content in everything. Um,
Hmm.
and that's what he said. And when he's uh without anything, he's content, and when he has everything, he's content. And I think that yeah, it's a healthy place to be. And I think it is very beneficial to consider what would we do without the things that we have. But also, we shouldn't obsess about it to such an extent where it's like, well, maybe I'll lose this someday, and what am I going to do without Kleenex? What am I going to do without toilet paper? I feel like at some point might become a little obsessive, but I think it is reasonable to consider at least the major parts of our lives. What would we do without these things? And it's not bad to have these things. It's such a blessing. The fact that
Hmm.
God has allowed us to uh, experience this prosperity, and so those that experience that prosperity, though, it's their duty to not become complacent in it, to be completely secure and not be security. People get rid. Sorry, I'm thinking of the phrase. If people sacrifice the freedom for security, then they'll have neither security nor freedom.
Yeah, eventually. Yeah.
Eventually, and
Hmm.
that's part of where we're at in many parts of the United States. Is people have been sacrificing freedom for prosperity, and we are going to feel the pain eventually of what it means to give up all of our freedom. Um, I think.
Yeah.
And the idea of abortion, how huge it is in the United States at this point. It's it's scary because I know that God is not going to just turn a blind eye to that. And we've given the doctors the ability to kill children before they're even born. That's a scary thought that they can just kill innocent children before they're even born. And I feel like we've gotten so comfortable with getting what we want, and or at least some people are, that they'll give anything to just uh, have an easy life. Well, if I have a child, then I won't be able to have my job that I find really important, and I won't be able to do things that I want. I won't be able to go on vacation. I won't be able to take days off. I won't be able to control my destiny, kind of idea. And that's when you live in a prosperous country, and that's your mentality. Um, that's an unhealthy mixture of things. And so what we have to do is when we have a cool, new, useful tool like the internet, let's say, we have to use it well to become more productive, not less productive. To be able to do more, right? The fact that we can um, go across the United States in a vehicle, and it not take months or weeks or months.
And be life threatening.
Right. What's that supposed to do for us? I feel like it's supposed to make it easier to get places so that we can um, be able to save time and be able to use that time more wisely. Um, but yeah, again, I feel like I'm rambling, but that was just a couple of things that came to mind.
Well, the things are so bad, not only in the world, but let's just because a lot of times we'll project onto other countries our problems or our benefits, and they're completely different. They might be a lot better than us, or they might be a lot worse off than us. But we know us pretty good. So
That's an
when it comes
understatement.
to yeah,
We
yeah,
know us
when it
pretty well.
when it comes to things like abortion or it's considered like the most important right to such a point that if a country does not have abortion as legal, they're looked at as a backwards, enlightened country. Some back heels country that is not sophisticated because they're unwilling to kill their unborn. That's how twisted the mentality is, that those countries are rated as undeveloped countries because why? Well, because they punish the criminals and they don't allow child sacrifice.
Right.
That's how twisted things are. That's where the scripture says that, the truth will be said is evil, and the evil would be called the truth, and the light will be called dark, and the dark will be called light, and right will be called wrong, and wrong will be called right. And it's 1984 all over again. So um so yeah, we're in a world of hurt. So
Yeah.
speaking on the internet thing, and this is totally off topic, but it might be interesting.
Oh, yeah, no
I've been
problem.
thinking with this election thing coming up, I think it's, in my view, and maybe yours too, there's absolutely no way that Trump doesn't win. That being said, I also know that there is a large portion of the country that is for Kamala Harris, and I also believe that there's going to be cheating or whatever. But I don't think they're gonna. I don't think the other side is going to pull the cheating to win because it would be so obvious. You know what I think they're going to do, Z? You know what I think is going to happen?
No, I don't know what you think.
I think because of the electronic voting, it's going to implode so that they don't know who won, and it's going to cause a uh, uh, what's the word? It's going to cause mayhem because uh, they're not going to the voting machines are going to uh, be not working, or they're not going to be trustworthy, and the election is going to be thrown into mayhem and uncertainty, and and I don't know what their plan is after that, but I really think that's going to happen. Um, uh, it
Yeah, I
was
don't
one
know.
thing in the last. It was one thing in the last election. I do think it was stolen, but I still. That being said, I considered Biden the president. I accepted that that's what the country decided, right or wrong. Even if it was stolen, that's what they decided. But I think this time it's so the difference and the disparity is so great, and the momentum is only on one side. If the other side were to try to do just a steal, it would be so obvious. It'd be like, who? George beat Michael Jordan 1-on-1. Really?
Basically.
uh,
Well, it's an
so
interesting thought.
it comes
Sorry.
it just comes to the frailty of the digital world. How sometimes the old ways were better, like hand counting, paper ballots. It's pretty easy, you know.
Yeah, well,
But
I think that's definitely a better way of doing it. And the thing is, I I do think that it's important for people to be able to vote. But I also think that the way that we look at voting is weird. It's like we need to make sure that every single person possible can vote. I don't know. I don't know if everyone should vote. I I feel like just
the crazies are going to come out of the woodwork now. Keep going.
no, but I don't think that we should restrict unjustly. But I just think that where am I going with that? Oh, just that voting is broken in the United States right now. Dead people can vote. I think if dead people can vote, that's an issue. Um,
That just shows how gifted Americans are compared to other people around the world. We are so gifted that even when we're dead, we can vote because we have that amazing ability. And
yeah,
we seem to only vote one way, but
yeah, we're very consistent voters in the United States. But
go
sorry.
ahead.
Oh, just um, if there's a contesting about the uh who won the vote for president, doesn't it then go to the states to ratify the election? Right? It's like two
I
thirds of
think so.
majority.
Yeah.
Um, so if that did
That
happen, that would
we
then
should
be
be
what would
good.
happen.
Yeah.
But I don't
Uh,
know how the vote would end up. But if um, there is chaos in the ballot box, then that's what it's then going to go to the states, right? In that case,
yeah. Well, and regardless of what happens, I think mayhem would result. And guess what? Republicans did not burn down the Twin Cities in Minnesota, right?
right? Exactly.
Republicans didn't take over the Oregon and Portland and the wherever that was where they set up their I can't even remember the name of the country that they made it, but they renamed it to a certain area. Um, where in Milwaukee riots, it wasn't the Republicans or the conservatives that were causing mayhem and destruction. But if
Right.
something happens in this election, uh, it's going to be the same part. It's going to be the same group that's going to be causing mayhem and destruction. It's not going to be the Republicans.
Well, I hope not.
So no, it won't. It won't be. You know,
Yeah.
but I want to come back to you commenting about maybe not everyone should vote. And in reality, there's two ways to approach that. We would want people that are informed to vote. Okay. And it doesn't mean they have to agree with how we're voting, but just so you know, if they're voting for one candidate because everyone frightened them into voting for that, and they didn't know the real facts of the matter, uh, and so they voted for that candidate, we wouldn't like that. But if they knew the facts and they still wanted the lesser candidate or the one that's a liar or the one that's a thief, if they still want that, at least they're informed. They're not fooled. They've decided, but so what you're wondering about or what you're suggesting is that you just want informed voters. Okay. So then you got to go, well, like, how do you do that? Well, you'd have to have a test or you'd have to have some kind of, and that's just too big and too obscure and too uh, difficult to manage. And so it falls back onto what our founders and what just common sense tells you. You want a informed moral, and virtuous society, where at least the laws and the structure is in place to provide that
Right.
education and guidelines and just laws and all those things and honest media, you know, an honest press, a free press. Right now we have free press, but it's controlled by
Right.
one side.
Controlled free press.
Okay. Yeah, it's Pravda. It's Russian Pravda. It's Russian propaganda. It's propaganda from one side. And it wasn't even done, what would we say? That wasn't achieved even undemocratically. It's just all the liberal, progressive, communist minded people flooded journalism. And so it wasn't because the government said you can only be a journalist if you're this persuasion. Government did say that. But it was a natural occurrence where they all flocked to it. And then once they all flocked to it and had control, sure, a media giant could say, we're not going to hire any conservative leaning people,
Mhm.
you know? But so the everyone should vote, but that was based on a system that had good education system, both primary, secondary, and higher learning, and good family structure, a good church structure, a good civic structure. All those things have been compromised
Yeah.
to
Exactly.
some degree. And because of that, it's garbage in, garbage out. That's what's going to happen. Garbage in, garbage out. It's back to the digital thing.
Yeah, and
So,
it's a never-ending cycle, because it's like those things are compromised. Therefore, each election, there's more and more compromises that have occurred, and so the decisions we make become more difficult, and our knowledge becomes more polluted in what we know. And as far as the test is concerned, um, I can kind of see a test as an idea, but I guess I'm thinking more like you should be a U.S. citizen, obviously. You should have
mhm.
proof that you are alive. You should have an ID. Um, and let's say that there was a test. Yeah, sure. But the kind of test that I'm thinking is more like you should at least know what our system even is. You should know
Mhm.
that there's three branches of government. I feel like if you
Well,
don't know,
that comes back to a test.
yeah, no, I know, I'm talking about the test right now. But I'm saying if we had a test, that's the kind of information that I'd want to know, want people to know, and yeah, maybe like get your facts accurate or whatever. But I feel like my idea would be more like you actually know how the government basically functions. It should at least be known by people who vote. But
Hmm. Well, you mentioned some things that I wasn't even considering because it should go without saying. And that's how
right,
that's how back that's how backwards we are. That's how corrupt we are. When when one side pushes back on IDs, identification cards, or a proof of identification is required for voting, and one side pushes against that, we've already lost. Our system is already broken because if they're allowed to push back and be the prominent voice on that and in the media and in academia and and a lot of people say, yeah, that's racist or that's bigoted or that's whatever to require ID to vote. Uh, where do you even argue? How if you're the person that believes IDs are necessary for voting, which I am, you are, how do you argue why that should be necessary? If someone is like, where do you start?
Right.
Do
Well,
you start with, okay, let's not even talk about voting right now. Let's talk about addition. Do you agree 2 plus 2 equals 4 all the time? Yes. Okay, good. Do you think water is usually wet? And if they don't
usually,
know, yeah, if they don't know, then you got to go like, okay, well then now I understand why you now sometimes it's an absolute ploy, right? Some people are using that purposely knowing it makes sense to have identification cards or IDs to vote, but they already know that they want to get a bunch of people that should not be allowed to vote based on a normal governmental, societal, constitutional system because they're not citizens. But they have millions of them that they want to vote, and they're going to because they're going to vote for them, and so they already know that in the background. So they can't come out and say that, "Hey, we don't want identification required because we have a bunch of people that shouldn't vote."
right.
So what are they going to call it? Of course, they're going to call it racist
Because
or
that's all they
homophobic
have to say.
or yeah, or toxic masculinity. You just want people, or whatever. Yeah, it's an excuse because they have they're using a weapon of war, and they don't want it to be outlawed.
Right.
And so,
Well, and if your ideas aren't good ideas, then what you have left is propaganda, and that's what they use.
and force
Well, yeah,
and law.
that's also true.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's also the
yeah.
force. But
And
I mean, I don't know how anybody could justify you don't need an ID to vote. Like, how do you actually justify that in any way? Because it's like the people should know that you exist if you are wanting to vote. It's like, wow, that's like the basics of reality is it's just so straightforward. We don't want people that
well,
don't exist to vote.
it's so important to vote early and vote often. You're talking about the dead vote. What do we talk? What about the vote that? Oh yeah, I voted like 10 times or whatever. It's like uh, you also need the identification so that you're only allowed to vote once, right?
No, that's also true. Yeah,
That's why I
because
think it's funny. Vote early and often. Early's fine, but often's not not fine.
well, and um, early voting is hard because I get it. Especially for some people that can't make it to uh the ballot box. Um, I mean that's more mail-in ballots. But also voting early because like, well, I'm probably gonna be busy that day. There's a lot of stuff going on. Uh, I need to make time for it. I mean, our voting system is just broken at this point, and um, I don't know. It's a difficult
Well,
thing
and in
because there's
some
so
states,
many details that need to be worked out.
it's functions perfectly, right? Because it's normal, it's set up normal. But other states will have it will be uh, the legislature will push through that identification is required for voting, and then the state supreme court or a state's appellate court or a court will rule that that is unconstitutional to require identification. So so
Well,
we're
what does the vote say? Or not the vote? The Constitution say on voting? Does it say that
Well, that
voting should not be infringed or whatever?
right, something like that. But every state's different, and every state is similar to some degree, right? But to one another, but they are all different, and which is a good thing. But it wasn't the idea of having states and having different laws wasn't to have, well, let's allow murder in Indiana, but not in Ohio, and then let's allow some stealing in Pennsylvania, but no stealing in New York. No, that wasn't the idea to have differences of. Um, it was the differences in methods or ways or conditions of goodness. Some people want to build a house using an A-frame type of situation, or some people want to build a house using a truss frame situation. Those are all fine, but yeah, so some states are really the laws and the courts are used as a battleground for ideology to push through um uh and what's in general, the conservative or those who are law abiding will not use lawfare like that. You know,
Right.
the basketball team or the football team that's playing the other team that is a virtuous football team will not cheat in order to win the game. But the other team is totally fine with cheating. And so the virtuous team will resist using the same tactics as their enemy, or as their opponent. And so,
Well, more virtuous. I mean, it's a little iffy,
well,
depending
no,
on
what
who
I'm
you are.
saying, no, it's more virtuous. There'll be a resistance. They may fall into it, but if you want to do things right, and your opponent is always using underhanded things against you in that battle, um, uh, you will resist doing things unethical in order to win because you value virtue
Right.
and truth. You know, you may give in a little bit because we're human, but it's almost not worth if for example, if a country and the country's identity, if both parties decide to no holds barred, we're going to use any method to win, then that country will not be worth living in,
Right.
regardless of which side wins, because they've become the same thing.
Yeah, they become
And
Machiavelli.
yeah, so
The end justifies the
the,
means.
yep, right makes what might makes right, and um, wow, you started off with prosperity, and now we're into voting machines.
This is going to be a really easy video to name
Edit
and make a picture for.
a thumbnail, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but coming back to prosperity, where this all started from, I think it all ties together in this fact that in our country, we're in a position, we have been for a long time, that certain things that we took for granted, um, fair play, goodwill, um, those types of things are really in question. And so, how are we going to respond? And sometimes we haven't even realized that that is the case. That it's kind of like being cooked, that frog being cooked, 5 degrees at a time. Then all of a sudden it's cooked. And so you started talking about how, the conveniences you have, they're really necessities, but the convenience of the wheelchair and the convenience of the internet and the convenience of the computer and all those things. Uh, what happens if those are taken away from you or lessened or
Or
that's a
stop
real
working.
concern.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And how do you prepare for that? And so I think the Bible has the Bible is contradictory. That's why I'm an atheist. No,
We all
but
know that's not true.
right. The Bible seemingly contradicts only because guess what? When you're eating cereal, you don't use a fork, but when you're eating spaghetti, you do. So there's different applications for different times, but the scriptures uh, do both. They will say there is places in scripture will say you should prepare, you should save, you should store grain,
Right, like in
you
Proverbs and
know,
stuff.
in Proverbs. But just the example of Joseph in Egypt. Hey, a fourth of all that you have give to us, and we're going to store it so that when the time of famine comes, we have something to live on. Okay, so and in Proverbs too, in all the wisdom books about and even Jesus, when he multiplied the loaves and fishes, he said, "Collect everything up, so nothing is wasted." Right?
Right.
But then also the scripture talks about do not give a care. Observe the lilies in the field. Observe the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap, but yet their Father provides them. In fact, that's one of the things the atheist Christopher Hitchens, he hated that. He thought Jesus taught to live dissolutely and not prepare and not work hard and those kinds of things. It's like he's just being a sophist. He's just attacking and using whatever means, whether it's fair, true, or not, to win a case rather than achieve the truth. But the scriptures show both to prepare and to also not have a care
Right, it's
and have your eye set on heaven.
right, exactly. And that's actually the point, is having our eyes set on heaven. Right? And I
Hmm.
think that's what draws or fills out the entire picture, is what is our focus? What is our ultimate inheritance? And he says like, but what did he say about the treasure in heaven again? But
Well, it says, "Wherever your treasure is, there shall your heart be also." And then also he says that "Store up treasure in
yeah,
heaven, where neither moth nor rust
destroy,
can
right,
rob you of it."
right,
Right.
and that's actually a theme of Augustine's City of God in the at least the first couple of chapters, is about the reliance on earthly goods versus the reliance on heavenly good, and that if our inheritance is of this world, it's a lacking inheritance. But if it is of the next, then it isn't. And it uh, fulfills our life in the future and now. And so, because we have that hope, we should not set our hope and our eyes on the things of the world, but instead, we should seek the highest good and use these as means and tools to aim us even closer to that, or to provide for our needs while we are here. And
Hmm.
so, one thing that I use my computer for is reading. I read a lot on here. I read the Bible, I read other Christian books, and I read other things. And so, I'm using this as a tool to aim myself higher. And I want to make sure that I don't rely on the books and the physical things that I have in order to find all my satisfaction and worth. And that's
Hmm.
what I have to balance. And that's why I have to um, be aware that when this is taken away, I should be content. Even if I can't read. I should be content because life isn't only reading, for one, but also this life isn't where my investment and inheritance lies. It's in the future kingdom that lies ahead. And so,
Hmm.
therefore, we should be anxious about nothing. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't prepare. We should prepare. If we want to, let's say you have a family, you need to provide for your family. That's a necessity. That's something that you are called to do. And so, but that doesn't mean that you have to place your hope in prosperity and the physical world. But that means that we use this to love our neighbor, to love our families, and to love God more in any way that we can. And so, when Jesus says, don't be anxious, he's not saying you can't be prepared in some way. You can't save money. You can't. He's not saying that. He's saying, where does your hope lie? Is it in the things of this world or in God above who rewards those who seek him?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, and oftentimes, as we're storing up treasure in heaven, that will be the only treasure that we have, because the way the world is, and the fallen man, and God allows um, certain things for a greater good to occur. Um, a lot of times there's a promise in Scripture says those who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus shall be persecuted. It's
Hmm.
like that's the promise, okay? It's not those who desire to live a godly life in Christ Jesus shall be prosperous and never have any issues. It's like no. And
Right.
then when you think of, yeah, and then when you think of Jesus as the type and forerunner of our faith, who gave all, if we were to say that he stored up treasure in heaven, let's say, um, he probably did it at an infinite amount. And how did that work out for him?
Right. He was killed.
Uh, he was, yeah. And so uh, now that's not to say that's not what happens. God does want good, virtuous nations. And but we do live in this life, and so um if our treasure is in heaven, truly in heaven, then when the rug is pulled out, and it might be our own doing, and then we have to repent and go like, oh, I lost everything because of my stupidity, okay, or whatever. Okay, repent, that's fine. But what if it's done by somebody else? What if you're betrayed? What if you're terrorized, or by a tyrant, or by a tyrannical government, or by terrorists, um, um, at no fault of your own? What's going to be your attitude? Is it going to be hatred for the terrorists? Is it going to be hatred for the tyrannical government? We're not to approve of the terrorist, but we're to love our enemies
Hmm.
and to pray for them.
And
But
pray for
if
those
they
that
throw
persecute us.
Yeah, if they throw us off, then that just indicates that we're not as mature in Christ as we might think we are. Um, we may know all the proper doctrines. That's great. But if you react in anger, or distrust, or self-preservation, all your knowledge did you no good,
Right.
because the two goals are to love God and to love neighbor. That's the two things that are the proof. And
Yeah,
if
that's
all
what
your
Paul
knowledge,
calls us to do as well.
yeah, if all of our knowledge doesn't get us to improving in those two areas, then our knowledge is useless, or our use of that knowledge is quite, what would you say, useless, or quite unproductive. What's the word? We're not using the tools that we have for what they're really made for.
Yeah.
When what I think is really interesting is when Jesus is talking about uh, forgiveness, and then Peter comes up. I love Peter. I love all the apostles. I love all people that love God, because all of them have a certain fun thing to watch and observe in them. But Peter, he just says what he's thinking. And so
Yes, he
he
does.
goes, he comes up to Jesus, goes like, Jesus, because he's listening to what Jesus is saying. He's like, Master, if my brother sins against me 7 times, should I forgive him all 7 times? You know what I mean? He's like, yes, but not only 7 times, but 70 times 7. It's right after that that the disciples asked the Lord to increase their faith. Why? Why did they feel like they needed more faith? Because they recognized that their hearts were hard, and they weren't really loving their brothers like they claimed they were, because they needed to forgive them. And they thought, I need faith in order to forgive, you know? And so they were using the tools for what they were designed for, you know? Um,
Yeah, and something about that you pointed
mhm,
out that I think is important is because we do have faith, we can forgive. And I know it's really hard to forgive. It's not easy because it's like when we're treated wrong and unjustly, it's like I want recompense for the wrong that happened to me, and that's a really hard position. And so it's totally understandable why they would say increase our faith, because it's like um, I'm supposed to forgive the one that is going to ask me for um, to overpay in my taxes. What? I need
mhm,
to forgive him for stealing from me? How does that make any
mhm,
sense? And in the Old Testament law, doesn't it say uh, eye for eye, tooth for tooth? Well, if that's true, then that means I'm suffering unjustly. And then he says that you will suffer unjustly for my sake. So it's kind of overturns a lot of our perceptions. And with the eye for eye and tooth for tooth is for the judicial system and not for I think the interactions between people is if we don't demand um, recompense in our lives. And that's really tough. And some people say, "Hey, here's the toughest teaching of Scripture," or "Here's another toughest teaching." That's got to be one of them, because that is not how we typically look at things. And um, people do understand the idea of forgiveness, but there isn't quite the justification for it
mhm,
that is found in this, because uh, Jesus shows that the reason why, and I think we talked about this in a podcast before, but the reason why we are to forgive is because we've been forgiven our debt. And so, who are we to demand that $1,000 when we owed 40 billion to God? And so, how can we exact that payment from other
mhm.
people? It's tough, but it's true.
Well, Jesus said that the measure that you give shall be given in the measure that you give, and in the way that you give, that will be given unto you. And so, on one side, a couple thoughts come. You mentioned about we forgive because we've been forgiven. Okay, but there's more to it. We also forgive so that we will be forgiven, because we will fail,
Hmm.
and if we it's not only because we've already been forgiven, but it's because we're going to be needing forgiveness in the future.
Oh yeah,
the
that's
Our
true. For
Father
every sin
says
that
that
we
very,
have.
very clearly. And then the other thing that is interesting, uh, when you think of the law was an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and there's aspects of the moral law that some may say that do not apply any longer. It's like because we're in the law of grace. It's like, well, let me throw a question out there. Is when we think of the parable that you brought up, that guy goes, the master calls in that one slave who somehow owes him like $1 billion, and he's going to throw him in prison. And the slave cries, "Please have mercy on me. I'll pay." Blah blah blah. And the master goes, "You know what? I'll forgive you of all your debt." So that's the law of grace, right? Operating. But that's not the whole parable. So then the guy goes out after being forgiven $1 billion, and he sees someone that owes him $1,000, and he grabs him by the throat. And everyone knows the parable out there, and we've said it many times. And he throws him. He goes, "Please give me time to pay, and I'll pay." And he goes like, "Nope." And he threw him and his whole family into prison until he paid. Well, then the other slaves go and tell the master what they observed because it grieved their heart so much. And so the master called in that slave who he had forgiven $1 billion. Says, "What have you done?" Says, "I forgave you all that, and you didn't." And then guess what the master applies? Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. It's like you rejected grace. Here's the other law that also still applies. And he cast him in. He cast. Now I wonder. It always. This is another subject. Uh, but I always wonder. If you get cast into prison until you pay the last penny, how in the world do you pay the last penny if you can't work?
Right.
If every, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
Must be even more difficult to pay. Maybe that's because they're selling off your properties while you're in prison. Who knows?
Well, maybe the
But
point isn't necessarily that he will pay it off, but that that insurmountable debt he now has to keep paying. And maybe there won't ever be an end to it because it was an insurmountable debt.
hmm well, that can lead us into another subject, but yeah. So where were we going with this? How did we get here? Just that where
That's
where
always the question that we're asking is how did we
where
get
our
here?
where our treasure is, there shall our heart be also. I think that's kind of where we got around, but so practically, coming back to uh,
The
one thing
main
that
point.
occurred to me:
Okay.
if you got a bunch of countries on the world, and this one country is has accomplished peace, has very peaceful reign. There's no wars going anywhere, and they're living in a time of peace. That peaceful kingdom does not disband its military.
Unless you're
Someone
Japan.
will say, "Yeah, well," and now
But they were
they did that
forced
for a
to.
reason. They were forced to because they didn't know if they could,
That's the other
because the
subject.
emperor thought he was a god.
Yeah.
And so when you have crazy people, uh, anyway, that's a whole nother
Yeah,
subject.
I
But
don't even know why I said that. Sorry.
Japan, that Japan thing was handled so well. It was done so well. I mean, um, how the United States handled Japan. Um, Japan wasn't crushed beyond ever rising again. It was given certain parameters that it was not allowed to do because they couldn't be trusted with weapons, and they built and became prosperous. And anyway, that's a good story in human history of how Japan was dealt with, and how that ended up. Because now they are allowed, but that's another story. Um, Coming back to a country at peace, you know, does that mean they disband their military? It's like, well, if we're living in the heavenly kingdom, yeah, you don't need a military. But if you're living in this kingdom, you do need a military. And even when you have peace on all sides, you still need a military. And the challenge for the military uh, is the challenge that you have brought up. In peacetime, the challenge for the military is how do you stay prepared when you don't have a threat? There is a threat. There's a potential threat out there. You know that things can go crazy again, and you can have tyrants attack and this kind of thing. But you have to prepare. How do you prepare? Exercise. You know, training. But even with the best motives, a military in the time of peace will start to a little bit decay, right? A little bit because they're not forced to fight. Um, and so we in our lives, we have it pretty good. Like, we have a lot of conveniences. How do we keep ourselves prepared? That's a big challenge, and there's a lot of ways to do that. Um, One of them is just like we said, doing thought experiments of what would I do if this? What would I do if that? Um, Reading, praying, going to church, attending the sacraments, having good fellowship, having good friends. Um, um, all those things help us stay prepared. And then there's also practical things, learn to fast. I mean, when Jesus says, when he's asked, well, how do these demons get cast out? He says, these will not come out without fasting and prayer. And somehow we only hear prayer, you know, somehow we only hear what is this fasting thing? What does that have to do with anything? And so there's things that we practically do to guard ourselves against unhealthy attachments or I say unhealthy to guard us because good things can become a weight
Right.
and a hindrance to us. Even good things.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
so
well, um, even good things. Well, most of the things that do end up weighing us down are good things that are either um, that are misused, like
mhm,
food, too much food,
mhm.
um, or even uh, you know,
Too
alcohol,
many cigars.
definitely, and
Mhm,
cigars. Uh,
mhm,
I like that example. Um, and other such things aren't necessarily bad, but they can become unhealthy attachments if we uh, use and abuse them too much.
mhm.
But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, we've got it's always well, the saying that it's easy when things are easy. When things are going good, it's easy to have the right attitude. When things aren't going so good, how is our attitude? What's my attitude? Um,
yep,
and so yeah, and I
good
think
discussion.
I think we're going to be faced with a lot of very difficult things as time continues on. Um, we just automatically think that well, if we just do everything right, our country's going to turn around and this and that. What if it doesn't?
Right,
Are we still going to keep doing what's right? Are we still going to maintain?
right. It shouldn't
Uh,
matter. It should. We should always try to do what is right, no matter prosperity or poverty. And yeah, I mean, yeah, it's good to hope for prosperity in the world. Yeah, but that's not our end all be all focus. It should
mhm,
be on our eternal inheritance, and that these things may follow, and these things are good, because we are called to love others. So of course I want to um, you know, help people out. If I mean, of course I aspire to want to help other people and fight for their prosperity. Um, and it's good, but where does our inheritance lie? Is the ultimate question.
Mm-hmm.
And it bothers me the degree that politics is about the economy nowadays. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
what we focus on. Yeah, economy's good, but the only way that we can have a stable economy is if we have a stable culture, a good um, society, and goodness only is possible when we have a good society. And yeah, we hope for that turning back, but what we should hope for more is just that people know God, even if prosperity doesn't follow um, from the culture changing or turning to God. But that's also something that can affect our prosperity and our blessing, because that's shown multiple times, right, in Scripture about
Mm-hmm.
uh, to Israel, the promises were, if you do well, um, you will live long in the land. If you turn to God, you will live long in the land. That's something that's brought up multiple times. And there's a certain level of temporal good that is good to strive for, but the turning to God happens first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, the economics, like you said, the promises that if you do well, you'll prosper. And it wasn't, if you have the right economic plan, you'll prosper. It's like,
Right.
and it's a little bit of a antimony or paradox, um, that it's not the economic plan that causes you to have economic prosperity, but it's important. It's part of it, but it's not the reason why. It's because you're virtuous. That's why if our country voted for life, if we were the dumbest economically, and we voted for life and for true masculinity and for true femininity, and we voted for proper sexuality, if those were the three things we voted for, and we could not add at all, we'd be so prosperous we wouldn't even know what to do. But because, like you said, the emphasis of and we understand when they say, "Have you were you doing better 4 years ago than you are now?" You know,
Right.
well, yes and no. It's like that's not really the question. Was the reason why we were doing better is because we had better economic policy? Yes, but it was a result of the foundation of reality and logic and goodness that that party that enacted those economic policies had. It wasn't the economic policies by themselves. They don't float in the air. They have to have a mooring,
Yeah,
and that
exactly.
needs to be in goodness. Goodness is the first mooring, and but anyway,
No, yeah,
the first.
absolutely.
But well, we covered everything except I do want to bring back the submarines. Are fascinating me. They found a submarine off the coast of, I think it was Sweden, from the World War II.
Oh, really?
Unfortunately, yeah. Unfortunately, like I don't know if it was off the coast of Sweden. Um, I think it was off the coast of Iowa.
The coast
Iowa
of
doesn't have a
Iowa.
coast. Iowa doesn't have a coast, but it was off the coast of somewhere in Europe where they
Iowa's
found
not in
the.
Europe either.
I know, but in Europe they found a submarine off the coast from World War II. Unfortunately, there's like 89 service members that were on it,
Oh,
but it's at the bottom of the ocean. But so yeah, I want to bring it back to submarines, and I think that is really this. I'm voting for the party that's pro submarine, and is what I really want to focus on. Where your submarine is, there shall your flippers be also. I
I don't
don't
know
know.
about that one.
Try
All
again.
right. No, don't try again, please. You already.
Where your submarine is, there shall your scuba gear be also. That's not bad.
No, that's
Kind of dumb.
still kind of
Better.
dumb. Yeah.
Dumb.
Yeah, we'll think about it. All right.
Okay. Well,
That's
hey,
a good place to end.
and yeah, maybe you can edit
Submarines.
that out. Please
No,
edit that
I'm
out.
not gonna edit it out.
Godspeed.
Have a good week.